everyone. Welcome. My name is John Parkins, and I'm the Dean here at the Augustana faculty, and I'm pleased to get the process started for this event, and thank you for coming. It's really great to have you here on our campus in our lovely chapel space, and we have a great program ahead of you today. So I just want to start with a territorial acknowledgement. The Augustana campus of the University of Alberta is located at the Sinisgaus or Stony Creek in Treaty 6 territory. The territory provides a traveling route and a home for the Massabachis, Nehewak, Niitsitapi, Nakota, Tsuut'ina nations, the Métis, and other indigenous peoples. So with our community, we acknowledge the importance of the Cree value of Wokotwin, and we have a Wokotwin Lodge in our forum in the lower level here. Wokotwin means kinship with each other and with the land. So we seek to express this value in our meetings and in our conversations with each other today. So we want to welcome all of you to the event. Thank you for grabbing some food. We want to acknowledge that the food and the beverages were graciously provided by Scotiabank. And I also have a bit of a surprise announcement that Scotiabank is also offering 2 free tickets to an Oilers game, and we're going to have a draw at the end of the event here. And so the winner of this draw will get these 2 free tickets to the Oilers game. Maybe you can thank Scotiabank for not sending you to the game last night. Future game will be much more fun for everyone involved. So this event is the second event, part of our new agriculture speaker series here at Augustana. The series was launched this fall. So if you missed the first event last year, it's we do have it recorded and it's available on our website. Is there a website listed up here? No, but the website you can find easily. It's uab.ca/ag-series, and you'll find the recording there. Our first presenter was John Williams, who's here at the back of the room, and I'll say a few words about our next presenter in a few moments. So this topic, this speaker series is in an area of work, of teaching, of research, of learning that that we're really interested in. Agriculture has not traditionally been a big part of what we do at the Augustana campus, but we recognize that we are in a very, very rich and extensive agricultural landscape around us in agricultural communities. And so we're excited to bring a number of topics to you that are relevant with regard to the kind of research that we're doing here at Augustana and the kinds of topics and issues and concerns that are relevant to you in the agriculture sector. I was just noting before I came to the event this morning, I was looking on the Camrose County website. I know that many of you come from Camrose County and counties around the area, but just within Camrose County, it indicates that there are 986 farms. It's actually an increase in the number of farms in this county since the last census period. 73% of this land is cropland. There's also 146 ag businesses in this county, and 24% of the workforce in this county is working in the ag sector. So it's a really significant and important sector for this region, and Augustana is very pleased to be able to contribute to this in a number of different ways. So today we're excited to have a talk about the idea of farm succession planning. And so to introduce our speaker, Kevin Chaunut, who is the Chief Client Officer at the Agriculture Financial Services Corporation, or AFSC. So Kevin is sitting here amongst the panelists. Kevin has over 20 years of experience in agribusiness and agri-food, and has worked with several leading Canadian companies, including CIBC and TELUS Agriculture. These experiences have given him a deep understanding of agricultural banking, technology, service, and product innovation, as well as customer experience and strategic planning. He will be one of the panel members for the discussion that follows this research presentation. So at this point, I'll ask Kevin to come up and introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome. Good morning, welcome back after the break. We had a really good start to the day with Vanessa's presentation. You might be wondering, what does the Chief Client Officer mean? Well, I'm responsible within the organization to oversee our lending, our claims adjusting, our insurance, and our client care division. And as an organization, we're just delighted to be here to share in this really important conversation with all of you. It really is essential to our industry. So earlier today, we spent time talking about farm transition and succession planning from that perspective, how families think about the future of their operations and prepare for change. This next session builds on that conversation by looking at another important piece of the picture, how people experience those transitions and what supports resilience along the way. At AFSC, we work closely with producers and families across the province, and we see firsthand how strong farms are built on strong people. Supporting agriculture means understanding not only operations and risk, but also stress, well-being, and the realities families face during periods of change. We see ourselves as a trusted community partner, one who walks alongside producers as they navigate both opportunity and challenge. That's why we're pleased to be part of this session and to help introduce a speaker whose work brings research and real-world experience together in a practical and grounded way. Rebecca Purc-Stephenson, PhD, is an applied social psychologist and professor at the University of Alberta's Augustana campus. Her work focuses on stress and resilience in rural and farming communities with a strong emphasis on turning research into tools that actually work on the farm. Rebecca partners directly with producers, community organizations, and healthcare providers to develop farm-informed approaches to mental health and well-being. Having lived and worked on farms herself, she brings both professional expertise and lived experience to her work. She is the provincial lead and researcher for the Agricultural Wellbeing in Alberta initiative, known as AgWellAB, and a co-founder of AgNo, the Alberta Farm Mental Health Network. Both focus on strengthening communities and ensuring producers have access to meaningful and practical supports. We're looking forward to the insights Rebecca will share with us today and to the panel discussion that will follow, where we'll continue the conversation around readiness, resilience, and supporting one another through change. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rebecca Purc-Stephenson.
Thank you, Kevin, so much for that opening. That was really lovely. There we go. Okay. So welcome everyone for braving the very cold weather we had today to listen and learn about farm succession. My name is Rebecca Purc-Stephenson, and I'm very excited to share some of our newer research with you today. I'm going to be quite brief, as professors would like to talk and I like to talk, but I'm going to try to keep this as concise and yet informative so that you can come away with something new, and also just to ensure that we have enough time to have a really thorough discussion with our panel members and an opportunity for you to ask questions. So if there's anything while I'm talking that you were thinking about, or maybe earlier from Vanessa's presentation that you'd like to learn a little bit more about, take this opportunity and write down your questions. And at the end of the moderated session, one of us will come around with a microphone and you can ask a question to one of our panel members. So today I'm going to talk about the human side of farm transitions. And it's really about understanding the people, the process, and trying to start that conversation. So one of the things that I'm going to do here is that I always have this in my presentations of what my goals are. We'll talk really briefly about who we are because I can't do the work alone. And then I'm going to get right into the research. And I'll start by talking about the demographic shifts that are happening in the agricultural industry, which makes farm succession such an important pressing issue today. Then I'll get into our research findings. So what were the main priorities among producers that we interviewed, and what were the barriers and motivators for creating or delaying a succession plan? And then how do we translate those findings into something that was maybe more practical? All right, so this is one of my favorite slides, and probably one of my favorite pictures because it gets to showcase the wonderful people that I get to work with. So this is a photo taken maybe 2 summers ago when we were really getting into our farm mental health and wellness research, and these are my research assistants. And they are this dedicated group of undergraduate students at our campus. They all have a background in agriculture, or they all come from a rural area, and most times when they graduate, they take this knowledge back to their communities. And it's really been one of the greatest joys of being a professor in this program to work with those students. And I'm joined here today by 3 research assistants. I'm not sure where they are, but it's Chase Leslie, Kylie Suter, and Cadence Kruk, and then a sort of a bonus assistant is Sydney Sheriff, and they've been really instrumental in getting today and tomorrow's event up and ready. So thank you so much for your help, and there's going to be a lot of work I would do after. But I really couldn't do this work without them. All right, so getting into the data. So a few years ago, maybe a few years ago was being generous, in 2021, we did a provincial needs assessment to see what was happening in agriculture. And from some of that work was understanding what are some of those pressure points that farmers are facing. And one of the major stressors that consistently emerged was farm succession retirement. And so that became one of our main priorities or focus areas. And then around 2021, 2022, Stats Canada came out with some new agricultural census data. And what it showed was this continuous trend. And as you see here, the age of farm operators across Canada continues to increase. So of course, now we're a few years later. So the average age of farm operators at the time was about 57.5 years. Right now it's a few years later, a few years older. And so what we noticed too is that this trend isn't plateauing, it's not decreasing, it's steadily increasing. And what's interesting too is at the same time, right, the young people are not entering the industry. In fact, it's tended to decrease, and only more recently has it sort of plateaued, which might indicate that there's just sort of some changes in some of the work that's available. But this is a concerning trend. So what does this mean? When we dig a little bit deeper into this, we also find out with producers, with farm operators, nearing retirement. And I think one caveat, and I love this we interviewed hundreds of farm producers and their successors. When we were talking with one successor, he mentioned how his dad, who was, I think at the time, like 66, he called his dad young and farmer years. And I think that's important in that there's sort of the same metrics that we use to measure like when someone might move toward retirement. Yardstick is at 65, right? That's a much more fluid yardstick for people who might be in agriculture, right? They might think that, as long as they can physically do the work, right? They would like to continue doing the work well into their later 60s and even 70s or older. But you might assume that those who are near that sort of retirement age would have a succession plan. And the recent statistics suggest that's not the case. So less than 34% of Canadian farmers have a succession plan, or a plan of like what will happen, who will take over the farm. But among that 34%, 22% have only a verbal plan. And that probably aligns with a lot of Anessa's experiences, and Anessa has consulted and worked with hundreds of farm families. So a verbal plan really isn't a plan, because that can change. So among that 34%, just 12% had a formal written plan. So I want you to consider this in another way. Alternatively, we could say that about 88% of Canadian farmers do not have a written succession plan. So despite evidence that having one can promote personal well-being, workforce development, improves economic stability, especially for rural areas, and also reduces the risk that your business will fail. There we go. So when we had first started to do some research and some work on succession planning, I was getting a lot of push to, I need to create a toolkit and a training module and some webinars. And that's usually something that translates out of our work. But it took only a very quick internet search to show that this remarkable trend. Like, there are loads of excellent resources already available. There's a wealth of credible consultants who work, a lot of step-by-step guides, tips, workshops, seminars that already exist. There is no, I don't need to develop something where the industry is already saturated. But it also made me think, as a researcher, if there's all these tools available, and there is this need to have a succession plan, like, why aren't people using the resources? And every farm or ranch is more than a business, right? It's connection to family, to tradition, and provides essential food, fiber, fuel, and other benefits for society. So we decided to take a step back and consider the other factors beyond just the logical and financial considerations that might delay or motivate someone to create a succession plan. So our research program, and this is developed into something quite large, but we started with a basic question. We wanted to know what were sort of those psychological, social, or organizational factors that underline farmers' intention to develop or maybe delay a succession plan, right? What are those factors that help or hinder, and what resources do they find helpful, right? Given all of the wealth of resources, what do they really want? Right, so how did we do this study? So I worked directly with our research assistants, so they worked from on all aspects of the study, including data collection and also tapping into their networks. And all of the research assistants work from different farming communities across the province. And so using our collective networks, we were able to collect data from the regions across the province, across different commodity groups, and across different ages. And one of the changes I made sort of at the 11th hour was we needed to not just talk to one person from our family, we need to talk to a couple. So we used a method where, and these were separate interviews. So we talked to the farm operator plus one other family member. Maybe the spouse, maybe it was the successor. And that proved to be very interesting because on reflection, when we were going through the data, there was often not everyone was on the same page in a family. And again, this might align really closely with what Anessa's own experience has shown. So what did they say? So that's probably why we're all here today. So one of the first questions was what is your main priorities for creating a succession plan, right? If you're going to make one, or if you did make one, why? What was that pressing issue? And from their responses, there were three main categories. So, and what's interesting, if you consider these different categories, almost most of them take a farm first mindset, right? That is their priority. So over 2/3 would create a plan to preserve family legacy and the owning of land that has been passed down to them. And then that was followed closely by ensuring that the farm remained financially viable and could provide financial security as they age. Again, that stability and security, right, is something that was really important. So mom and dad wanted to ensure that if they left the farm, are they still going to have that stability and security? What would that look like? And what was interesting though is that the least prioritized factor was minimizing family conflict. And then when I was reflecting on my own experience, I'm like, that tracks. Okay, so from all of these interviews, what we did is that we analyzed them and we read through them and we pull out some of like the important themes or recurring issues. And as a team, we decide, what are those important factors? And then we go back to producers and we ask them, does this make sense? Did we hit the mark? So it's quite a long process. And what we found is that there were 7 major factors that tended to either be like motivators or barriers to creating a succession plan. So I have the 7 themes here and then a quote that might represent each one of them. And I'm going to just briefly go through each one with just a sentence or two. And I'll start at the top. So legacy and identity. That one was really interesting. And essentially for some of the individuals that we talked with, or spoke with, and one of them was a first generation farmer who was 91 years old. And he's now in the process of passing on his farm to his grandson. And so the succession plan has jumped a generation. But he really struggled with succession planning because he had lived his whole life on the farm and that's kind of all he knew. And it was really a strong part of his identity. And he had no idea of what he would possibly do if he wasn't working on the farm. Farm growth was a second really important factor, and this was especially like a motivator. So when there were plans for farm growth or to expand, there was also motivation to make sure that assets were in place and you weren't burdening the next generation with too much debt. At the same time, farm growth, if your farm wasn't growing, or if you found that you had a relatively small operation, right, you weren't really motivated to change, right? You may have thought of your operation as more of an acreage than some of the large farms that we see in Alberta. Family dynamics was a massive theme, and it was really hard to contain. And what was really interesting, and again, reflecting on some of our own experiences, this is an industry or a population that really values family. But I have never in my life observed like a lot of miscommunication among like a group. And again, my family is included in this too. So when we are speaking with different participants who may have been like a potential successor or farm operator, right? They would talk about their plans, and then when we ask like, have you talked to each other about it? No, we haven't. So again, setting expectations and making expectations and desires or wishes, like verbalizing them is so important. And oftentimes too, family dynamics showed up in and could stop a plan when there was disagreement with mom and dad. So dad may have thought that the farm should be passed on to whoever has shown up, right? So not everyone's going to get an equal, slice of the pie. Whereas mom would like everything to remain peaceful and harmonious, and everyone, the farm should be split equitably. And when there was disagreement among mom and dad, sometimes that was enough to stop the conversation altogether. Next was farm culture norms. As a group, farmers, they like to work, right? They are the most useful tool on their farm. So a lot of farm culture norms really do perpetuate that hard work, working into your later years. It's very different from other cultures and other occupations. The next was government policies. And again, I keep referring to Vanessa, but again, you might see this a lot. There was a lot of confusion or misunderstanding of government policies. Sometimes this might be from experiences back in the 80s, 90s, but wanting to be able to protect as much of your assets as possible, trying to minimize as much tax, and maybe waiting for like the right time to do this. And then the last two, guidance and expertise. So those who had created a succession plan had a team. So they had people who were really like dialed in, and it was never just a one-time, meeting with these professionals, but it was an ongoing discussion. So when they had a plan in place, they might have regular check-ins with their professionals who had agricultural background, see like what other sort of tweaks they could make, right? What other changes they could make. But these individuals knew who they were as people and were intimately familiar with their operation. And then the last one is physical health. So again, I mentioned how a farmer might think like they are the most important tool of their operation. And I love this quote, whereas as long as my body holds up, I think I have lots of time yet. So this was they were 71, and yeah, they were just as long as I can still do the work, I should just continue doing it because I know my operation and I know my cattle. So that's all fine to be able to present the themes, and it is very consistent with what we see in the research literature. Now, in terms of where does this sit in Canadian research, there's very little research that's been done in Canada on farm succession. So I know Clark Mandick, my colleague, who is the director of the ACSRC, he's working on some farm succession work also. But other than that, there really isn't much done. So our research is really some of the leading research that's been done in Canada on this topic. From our themes, it's still a lot, right? So I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could somehow translate that information into something that's more usable, right? Because oftentimes it's interesting about what the barriers and facilitators are, but so what? So putting it all together, we went back to our research team and said, let's kind of reanalyze it. What were like the major factors? Like, what were the real pressing issues? And what we found is that there were a couple of overarching key issues or factors, and it was that perceived risk and that confidence to have the conversation. So those were these overarching themes. And then you'll notice on this side, I have family dynamics. I kind of think of that as like the shadow on the wall, right? It wasn't directly influencing farm succession planning, but it could make things more volatile or easier. So it was always present, right? But it wasn't ever like the main motivator. So using this sort of high-low perceived risk, low risk, or comfort level, we were able to put producers into these different quadrants. And then we gave each of them a label. So I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. But then we have the active planners. So these are they plan, they talk, they have good relations with their family, they're open communicators, and for many of them, they might say, like, I want to see my kids set up for success, I want the farm to be viable, and I have a plan, who will take over when I retire. They'll have an active will, and also they're usually, their farms are growing, they have lots of assets that they want to protect. And also what made it easier is that the farm operator usually had hobbies outside of the farm. And they had worked with their successors and their greatest fear was to have a plan and then the junior operator take over, and then they're not part of the operation anymore. But they were able to carve out a role of the things that they really love to do at the work, but now they weren't doing any of the heavy lifting anymore. So they might come in during harvest time, at regular, decent hours, and do some work, but they weren't doing some of the major decision making. Right? Now that was for the junior. And then we have the back burners, or go actually to succession avoiders. So these are folks who are, they perceive there's a high risk if they don't have a plan, and they are also, they do not want to have a conversation about it. This is very uncomfortable. We also call these folks the private partners. So I don't want to suggest that these are individuals who put their head in the sand and ignore the situation. They perceived that there was a big risk if they didn't continue working, because they were the ones who were able to do the work, they knew the operation, and there wasn't anyone they thought was suitable to do this. And again, this might speak to not having those expectations, not having open communication. Then we have the backburners. These were folks who they didn't perceive a lot of risk, right? Why make a plan now? the relations are good, let's not stir the pot, right? I'm young, I have lots of time. So often they would decide to just wait, and this can be really easy to do when we have a long list of to-do items. And then the last group were the end of the line farmers. So these were like the low risk, or the perceived low risk of having a plan, and they also didn't want to have the conversation. And for many of these folks, they didn't feel that there was anyone in their family who could take it over or wanted to. Maybe their kids had gone on and had started their own careers, and they didn't want to come back and live on the farm. Or that their farm was relatively small, so they just decided, like, we'll just sell it and divide it up. And for many of these individuals, though, when we spoke with them, there was a bit of a sadness. They had lost some interest in the farm, maybe because they didn't have that same generational carryover from the next generation. But they were sad in seeing the farm go, and their interest was to ensure that they could go to a farmer to ensure that it would continue to be farmed. So from this, what we've done is actually translated this into something that's can be used to help identify where people are at in their succession planning readiness, and then develop tools, right? Give them the type of resources that their readiness level. So on an earlier slide, when I presented all of those resources, one of the issues and why people might not be using it is because it's just too much for what stage they're at, right? So I'm not going to give all of the resources and hit someone with textbooks if they're in that back burner stage. What I might do instead is give them like a checklist of items to do and make sure that we carry on the conversation so they can chip away at it. So these are just, again, I'm translating these tools into something that can be more practical for farmers themselves. And now just to wrap up, my final takeaway is also to remember that farm succession is an ongoing process. It's an ongoing conversation. So I know that there are many workshops that will pop up yearly, and those are wonderful. You should go to them. You always learn something. But it is something that you need to continue to have the conversation on. The readiness matters. So you might think about, where am I in my readiness stage? Right? And then if you're interested, you can chat about what that might look like for you to have some resources that will work well with you at the stage that you're at. And we know that avoidance carries risk, right? So when you avoid the conversation, right, it might really thwart having a plan in place, and that can put your family and your land and your business in jeopardy. And knowing that support is available. So we've been represented today. We have AFSC and some other resources. Scotiabank also has some programs. But for those who are part of the day's event, at our lunch there will be different tables hosted by AFSC members. So if you have a question, please go sit at their table and ask them some questions. Asking us some questions or asking me some questions. And just thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me talk. I could talk about this for a long time, but I won't. Right now, what I'll do is I'm going to sit down and I'm going to invite Alex to come up and give a moderated discussion with our panel members.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Kolwicki, and I work for an organization called Young Agrarians, and we are growing the next generation of farmers. So our mission is really to bring in more people into the agricultural space, and this conversation around succession is so important and juicy and rich to have, so I'm really delighted to be moderating this panel. We have our wonderful panel members on the stage here, so I think I'm just going to open it up and ask each of you to introduce yourselves and share a bit about how you're connected to succession. What does that mean to you in this world right now? Rebecca, or you just went, but would you like to share again? Yeah.
Okay, yes, very quickly. So when I think about farm succession, I think first about, I don't think about documented dollars, I think about the people, I think about identity, I think about relationships. And I recognize as an applied social psychologist that this is farm succession involves a lot of changing of roles, letting things go, moving on. It's a major life transition that can be incredibly stressful. So some of the work that we do really highlights, again, like the human side of farming. And so I think that one of the things that I would love to see more with farm succession planning is that human side discussed more, and not just the dollars and documents and the legal aspects.
Hello everyone, I'm Vanessa, born and raised on our farm, our mixed farm near Cremona. I say that we're living the succession, I call it a roller coaster. So on a family farm, we are strapped in together and we're going to experience the highest of highs, but we're also going to throw our hands up sometimes and experience some lows. But to me, succession is the beauty, especially in agriculture. We mirror the life we live, right? So we're a very cyclical industry. I think we all understand the beauty of life, the circle of life, to go back to the Lion King quote from earlier. And so I love watching that opportunity to work with our elders, have that next generation come in, see the energy, see the excitement. And I think it's, for me, my goal is always, I differ from a lot of advisors, but I think what we have to address in our industry is if you want to die with your boots on, let's make it happen, right? But let's make sure that we're setting up that next generation. We have a contingency plan of the roles. So to me, that's what succession planning means to me, is we have a plan to protect, but we get to live the life that we've loved and created.
Good morning again, everybody. Good morning again, everybody. I guess in addition to my professional career, I've also been involved in a commercial cattle operation with my father over the years, so we're looking at a lot of the same questions that we're going to be talking about on this panel. When I think about farm transition, it really is about those relationships, not only preserving those relationships, but also having the opportunity to make them even stronger. I think a really important element of farm transition as well is that knowledge transfer. So often we see that knowledge being kept close to hand. That can be the financial information, it can be some of the production decisions that are just kept in somebody's mind. So I think there's just a real rich opportunity to pass that along to support the next generation getting set up.
Morning, everyone. My name is Chella Ross. Thanks to Augustina for hosting this, and thank you all for coming. My husband and I live on a farm and ranch just outside of Camrose. And the interesting thing about us, I guess, is that I grew up on a sheep farm in southern Alberta, and my husband grew up in town here in Camrose, right by the co-op. So we bought a farm 12 years ago, and we thought we'd start with 7 cows and see how things went. And this, right now, currently my husband is at home doing chores, feeding 140 cattle. So it's quite interesting. The last 12 years have been very interesting. And we're right in the thick of it now, so I guess when I think of farm transition, I think of strong people make strong farms. The conversation is always how you ended your speech, Rebecca, was the conversation is ongoing, which is so true. And that would be us.
I'm Dennis, and this is my wife Andrea. I come at this, I guess, a couple different ways. I grew up on a family farm in BC, and my dad is 79 years old and kind of in the midst of the transition. And so when you were talking, Rebecca, about the different stages that succession looks like, I recognize the lack of communication and kind of just letting things happen in my farm that I grew up on. And it's transitioning to a couple of my siblings, but there's definitely that lack of communication still that I see. My wife and I bought a farm, and we started one here in Camrose County about 10 years ago. We've actually just transitioned off of that, or transitioned into another young family that is taking over our operation and kind of running with it and taking it further than we did. And we actually successioned that same farm from another family that was ready to move on, that had it for 10 or 12 years before us. And so the farm succession, I guess, of not family succession is kind of where we're coming from in this.
Wonderful, thank you all. Anessa and Kevin, maybe I'll start off with you two. From your experience working with farmers, why do people delay succession planning even when they know it matters? Are you noticing any trends in that direction as well?
Yeah, definitely in the communication and the conversations we have with producers along the way, I think it can just feel really overwhelming. It can look like it's a very complex initiative to start to undertake. And I think a lot of people are just wondering, is now the right time? They're starting to tell a story in their own mind that if I initiate this conversation with somebody, is it going to go as I planned? And if it doesn't, then what? So I think there's just a lot of kind of concern in terms of, not being able to have the tools to be able to dive into it. And I think in the course of our conversation, we'll try and give some insights in terms of how you can start to approach that.
Yeah, wonderful answer. I appreciate how you framed the question, and I think that's important to point out, because often when I'm at these events, it feels very, put the head in the sand, don't want to think about it, and I personally get very defensive to that statement, because I would argue that you guys we have too much time, and we're going around the field and we're thinking about it nonstop, right? So I don't believe in the head in the sand with farms, but I do believe in the overthinking, getting overwhelmed, stuck on where to start. And again, we have so many factors. I personally believe farmers were so incredibly smart, but the time restriction to crack this egg, right? We're trying to be agronomists, we're trying to do all of the production side on top of meeting with accountants, meeting with lawyers. So there's a huge investment. Yes, the return on that investment is astronomical, but I understand and empathize that time is also a big crunch as well.
Thank you. And for Chella, Andrea, and Dennis, I was wondering, what are the first small steps that you did to prepare for farm succession before anything formal happened? I think there's a lot of folks in the room who are in that, mulling things over in their head. What are kind of those things that started unsticking you?
Yeah, I think that we just started talking about it. Yeah, definitely talking about it, dreaming beyond the farm, thinking, is this, for us, it was a non-family transition. So do we want to do this forever? If we want to move out of this, what is that going to look like? How can we do that? Just really asking those questions. And there's a grief to it, because you're really attached to the farm. It's not just a job, it's a lifestyle. And so it's all of that you would be walking away from or transitioning away from. And so how do you feel about that? So I would say before we even actively began any succession planning, we were probably a few years of just sitting with that and feeling that and working through that for ourselves, and then the planning started.
I think for us, we have three daughters, three teenage daughters. So I think at our stage, we're more having lots of, first of all, just involving them in the work is everything. And sometimes it's easier not to, so involving them in the work. And then also having the discussions about, opportunities, because when you're farming, there are a lot of opportunities. It feels like at our stage right now. And so we've already kind of branched off into hay and land and cattle. And so, and finding complementary opportunities, I guess, and having those discussions and looking at the numbers and talking about the numbers with our kids and talking about, different ideas with our kids. And then, so they're learning, but then at the same time, they're also contributing to the organization and seeing, this morning we lost a steer. So, watching that and and watching that from the beginning to finding it to dealing with it and everything, right? So I think if they're contributing in part of it, then they're seeing everything, and that's going to be helpful in the long run for sure.
Thank you. And something that Andrea said that I think resonates probably with many people is that it's not just a job. So Rebecca, I'm curious to hear from you about this question around like, why is succession also an identity issue? You know, it's not just logistics, it's not just a job. What else does it mean for folks from your research?
Yes, I love that question. It is one of the things we've learned from the research is that succession planning is incredibly stressful, and what partly makes it incredibly stressful isn't just the dollars and the land value and that, but it's that it can be so closely tied to how someone views themselves and how they spend their days. And if they're part of a multi-generational farm family, the land holds value, right? They become very attached to the land and all the stuff on that land. And to transition out of it can just feel so heavy. And it can be really hard to have that conversation because it reminds us of the end, right? It's just the end of our life or time. No one wants to have that conversation. And also just with a lot of the agricultural changes and innovations that are happening, different generations, younger generations might have different views. And so there can be some intergenerational conflict of having too much change too fast. And so that can, again, sort of be really challenging to sort of let go of the reins a little bit and see where someone might take the farm family in a different direction. And again, having open communications about what is the common vision, right, among different generations. And what we find is that conversation very rarely happens, or it happens in side conversations with some family members. And so that's for those so one of our major research projects is actually focuses on farm culture. And what's amazing is that in Canada, agriculture is such a major part of our history and our social fabric, but we don't actually have a lot of understanding about farm culture. And so it's really interesting to see how it weaves in a lot of the issues such as succession planning. So our work is looking at how do we make this process easier by supporting people in how they do their job or how they live their life, and how do we help people who work with them to fully understand their needs so that they can meet them where they are.
Just curious, how different those cultures are, as we all know, within Alberta culture. Even if we want to do Alberta, it's always amazing working with clients across the province. You can start to, of course, pick out stereotypical themes, but how different. And my husband, they ranch down in Cypress Hills, his family down by the border, and man, I thought I'd stepped onto the moon, right? So learning that culture intimately now and things like that, but I think that's such an important, there's so many cultures within the culture.
And maybe I should pass that microphone back over to Vanessa there, because I'm curious to hear about what kind of practical strategies you've seen that really help families or across generations basically protect that relationship and make those big decisions, given all those factors that Rebecca just shared.
Yeah, I think taking the pressure off that, that's why I kind of made that first comment, creating a transition plan does not mean you're done, unless that's what you want. And then that's a beautiful transition plan, right? But if that's a big hindrance, I think one of the most practical strategies you articulated at the beginning, I often joke if I can get mom and dad in the same binder, I'm happy, I've done my job, because there's no way I'm getting them on the same page, right, to start. But that's a critical piece of, we're trying to break it into chunks. What are we going to do to bring in junior generation? Well, if mom and dad aren't aligned, we can't move forward, right? So it's going to take some time and some effort for that alignment. So that's a very simple first step, but that's a very critical first step. I really like the comment. Again, just things that we think are common sense, but because we live it, where are you having these conversations? So even a day-to-day operational meeting, if it's at mom and dad's table in the morning having coffee, who's left out of the conversation? Tell me, who's left out? We go to the farm, mom and dad still live on the home place, we're having coffee, who's left out of that conversation? Probably the wife, right? Stereotypical example. Okay, well now we've had this evolution where a bunch of farms have built offices in their shops and things like that, which is an excellent business move. Well now mom's left out for the first time in the journey and really, feeling that. So it's those very intentional without going to the extremes of writing things down.
Yeah, Kevin, do you have anything to add to that, kind of practical tips that you've seen?
Yeah, those are great points, and that's for sure. So I think when we think about some of the steps that you can take, is one of the most important things you can do is start to establish your advisory team. When you think about it, and Vanessa talks about it in terms of all your responsibilities from agronomy and livestock management, et cetera, when you start to think about legal and tax and facilitating meetings and setting up your financing for your operation and different things like that, it's impossible to do that all as one person. So the more you can get that professional expertise around you, the easier it is going to make your life. So that's one thing. The other thing is to absolutely start early. I think maybe have some follow-up questions. You're going to talk about that as well. But the earlier you start, the easier it's going to make for you. And there was one other point, but I can't think of it just now. So.
Do you want to expand on that? What does starting earlier, what kind of effect does that have that you've seen?
Well, I think when we look at where producers start this journey, the ones that we see being most successful are the ones that do begin very, very early in the process. So essentially, when you start farming, you need to start thinking about it, because that change is going to be inevitable at some point. It's going to happen. So you can either create a plan and you can be a part of that, or you can let it happen to you. And if you do the latter, trust me, you're not going to like the outcome, because other people are making that decision for you. I think the other thing that we see with that is when people are really proactive about this part of their business, we see it translate into other aspects of their business. They're thinking ahead of what that next capital purchase is going to be. They're thinking about those agreements that they have, all those types of things. So that intentionality and the focus, just in terms of the business management, is critically important.
I think from my perspective, as someone that's right in the trenches right now, it's like, I do feel like we have a strong team. I feel like very confident about our financial advisor and very confident about our tax lawyer and our lawyer. And I think that makes it feel exciting, like we can do. And even just our team on our farm right now, like we're training someone today. My husband's at home today. We have, even agronomy, we have someone that we really think is just a great agronomist. We feel like we're really lucky to work with him, all those kind of things. Like we have great operators. So I feel like when you do have a strong team, it's more exciting, and it feels like you can do things and you can kind of branch out and try new things and do complementary things. And it's just, yeah, it's definitely beneficial.
I have a question. Always listening for, I can't turn off my professor group. So when you're talking both about teams, so who would you recommend? So for Kevin and Vanessa, who would you recommend be part of this team? So not just the farm family, but professional wise, who should be, if someone's thinking about who do I need to recommend, is it just a lawyer, is it an accountant, is it a farm advisor, who should be in this team?
Yeah, so for those of you that were part of my presentation this morning, that was the slide that I showed twice, right? Because it was so important. So the way I like to think about it is the family, business, and ownership. So, do we need any support on the family side? The stereotypical would be, of course, our accountant, our lawyer, who's on your team for financial planning. But again, in this starting early conversation, I think my agronomist is on my transition team, right? Absolutely, because I think that the vet is on my transition team, because if I don't have a very strong business going forward, and what I think is a really good strategy, just a little homework assignment for you guys for a tool, is go home and all of you individually write out who you think is a key part of your farm's team. Let's take transition out, just who's a key part of your farm's team, of external advisors and internal in your family as well. And then we compare results. And that's a fantastic exercise because it allows us to see, we just did it with my own family, and my dad had Bob in the business circle, and I was like, who is Bob, right? Like, I had no idea who Bob was, and Dad was like, it's Bob. If this situation came up, he's the first guy I call, like, I trust him for that. So now when we put our transition lens on, I go, okay, if Dad passed away prematurely, I already know Bob is a trusted contact that I could go to have support. And that's the one lens of what happens if the key decision maker passes away early. But the other lens of transition planning, in my opinion, is now I'm going to build a relationship with Bob while alive, right? So that's just a quick little homework assignment.
Yeah, just to build on that, I think one other element that can be really important is when you think about some of these conversations that you're going to be having amongst your family members, or in the case of a non-family transition, they could be complex conversations, as we talked about. So even having somebody who has expert facilitation skills, even mediation skills to a standpoint, they can be a really valuable team member within that group as well. I think thinking broadly about your overall operation, often people don't think about the banker as being part of that conversation as well. But when you're going through the planning for this, you're actually going to need financing. So what does that look like, and how do you make sure you're set up for success that way? When you think about that facilitator as well, as building on one of the earlier questions, I think it's also vitally important that you do treat this as a business. We talked about it being a way of life, but it's critically important that you treat it as a business. And we've even seen some success stories where operations, and they were a little more, extensive or large in scope, but they would actually have like quarterly board meetings where they would have somebody come in and they would have a chair of that group, and they would take minutes, and there was key responsibilities outlined and things like that. So that formality can really help you in the long run.
The one piece there, again, thank you. Of course, there's advisors such as myself, other advisors that look at the whole plan holistically, which I think is a really important piece as well before diving in. But to that conversation, if we've built our team, what I find is the next hurdle, if we can help you guys with, is having the technical professionals work with each other. So a lot of people say to me, how do I know if this is the right accountant? How do I know if this is the right lawyer? One of the key things I look at is, are they willing to call, if it's an accountant, for example, are they willing to call the lawyer directly? Like, we joke around by saying it's Latin, but our law is, a lot of it is in Latin. So as a farmer, why am I the gopher of in between? Having misunderstanding, miscommunication, that can be, and I'll get a pushback. Well, Anessa, that's going to be an expensive phone call. And I'm like, well, it's a lot cheaper than having 4 phone calls in between. So to me, that's a really strong, cohesive team when they'll work together.
And Chella, Andrea, and Dennis, do you want to speak to the idea of a farm team and who supported you or is supporting you?
Not so much about a farm team, but something that stood out. Like, we're a medium-sized farm, so not a huge operation, and it was us running the show. But yeah, just something we've noticed, even with non-family transition, is like being willing to be fully transparent with everything, or how much we make, our costs, are like just the full rundown, and having good organization to leading up to it, so that we can, like, even though it's not family taking over our farm is so special and meaningful to us. And when we thought about going off, like leaving the farm, we did not just want to sell it as a property. We wanted to sell it to someone who would love this place as much as we did, who would carry forward our values that were so important to us, who would keep serving the community in the way that we had connected with the community. So in that, we wanted to see this next farmer succeed with our property and our business that we built. And yeah, so in that, having really good organization that we can show them everything, how we've done it, have all our contacts, have our team, yes, but also set them up for really good success with that. That was really important. So full transparency in that whole process as well. And we noticed that too, just with, we have seen the family succession happening, as observers. We're not part of that because we're not taking Dennis's family farm on, but or his parents' family farm on. But yeah, we've witnessed not being transparent. There's a lot of parents who don't want to share all the information and they keep it really private. And the next generation doesn't know what they're going into. They don't know what they're even looking at. So, yeah, important.
Shella, did you want to add?
I don't really have anything to add, but I agree with what Andrea said, just like knowing your numbers and then being able to tell others what your numbers are. And I don't think everyone can do that. I think that's actually as basic or simple as it seems. It's extremely important.
And I would say beyond our production numbers, right? Like that's a huge gap that I'm sure we're very aligned on. Is, you know, seems to be in the industry, you know your cost of production or you don't know your cost of production, but you have a rough idea. But we all know there's a lot of management that goes beyond our production numbers, and then to keep adding to that complexity when we sit down and go over that financial overview, you again have to have two hats as a manager, right? You have to have your cash hat of where's my operation going, I'm running in cash and doing all this, and then I have to put how do I tear apart my tax return and wear my accrual hat and work backwards. So that's why, again, we're the smartest people in the room. We have so much going on. I think, again, it comes back to we need that team to support us.
Yeah, thank you very much. Some of the conversations come around, even with opening your books and things like that, is about this idea of giving away control or shifting of roles, moving decision-making to somebody else. And so I'm curious, that's a very hard thing to do. And so how have you seen people kind of work through that tension of wanting to see it succeed, but knowing that you can't be controlling the process anymore? I'm curious to hear from all of you.
Well, I think there is an element of privacy. Some people would consider this very private, like even someone in my family that I'm up here on this panel, like it's a very private thing. But I think the more transparency and the more you know your numbers and the more you're comfortable talking about it and you know what's going on, it kind of makes you more comfortable then having the discussions. And then once you have the discussion, my husband and I are having these discussions and we're having them with our children. So then it makes it more comfortable for me to be sitting up here having this discussion because everyone in my house and my in-laws and my parents and that sort of thing, they know kind of where we're at, and so then there's no surprises. And so I think if you have these discussions, it still is a private thing, and recognizing that, but then also, as you start having them being more comfortable with it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Being aware of them and when that transition happens, like for us, like a non-family transition, they're buying into a business, and so if I'm not going to go buy a business that I don't know how their financials are because it's out of sorts, and trying to figure out can I make this a go, and putting hypothetical numbers. And so that was really important for our transition to be able to be transparent with the family that's taking over and be able to show them what we do and our costs and our income and what that can look like. And again, like you said, Jill, there's private information there, but to be prepared and ready with your books, and because it is a business, like there's a business aspect to it as much as it's a lifestyle.
I was just going to add, as far as like that, working through that transition, I think like we definitely both chose ultimately an attitude around it, that we were going to bless the next people who might do things differently than us, but that more than how the farm is run, ultimately we want to see it succeed, and we want to see it bless this next family and this next generation as it did for us and while we were doing it. And so having that broader perspective and choosing that attitude towards it, and then also we chose a role of mentorship. So we're mentoring these guys, and we're sharing everything we've learned. We've spent, a decade of gaining so much wealth of knowledge and experience. Like, we want to share that with them so that they don't have to go through all the same trials that we went through to learn all the things we learned. We can set them up for success to go even farther and bigger, hopefully, than we did. That's the hope. That's the dream.
I think I'd like to add to that too about the mentorship. And so I think for those producers who were the farm operators who were able to work toward an active plan, they had put into place a plan where they would continue like a mentorship role. And in some cases, the junior generation, they felt ready to go, but it was just this important sort of changing of hands and almost symbolic, and also just, I think, respected the roles and that level. It's not just, it's so different from other occupations, but there's so much to learn about either the land or the equipment and the operations that it takes sometimes years to learn. And so that mentorship role and ensuring that in these conversations that it's even for like the junior operator generation to communicate like how important it is that they want to receive that mentorship from the existing generation.
I think something I'll add to that is we focus so much on, just from when we did our hands up exercise in my presentation, and knowing there's people here that maybe don't have a successor or have off-farm kids. I feel we have a huge gap and a huge disservice that we don't educate our non-farm kids. And so I'm very passionate about that. It is more difficult today to drive into the yard, see the $1 million combine sitting in the yard, see the things, and then say, oh yeah, we're so cash poor, which I'm not arguing. But we have to back that up with a conversation. And so one family I sat in, we just did rough cowboy math just on the land. It took mom and dad $67 of capital to make $1 of grocery money. So that's a really important conversation to have with an off-farm child when their life revolves around, I don't have to own anything to go to work except for the vehicle and my clothes because my job provides my laptop, my job provides. So I think that education piece is really important there. And then again, why bringing in a third party? I do this for a living. My dad did this for his career. We still bring in facilitators all the time because it's hard. You're invested, it's emotional. And so that's where, in this conversation, sometimes I can, in my role, we can talk in circles, but somebody's got to come down and be a little bit blunt and say, what is feasible here financially? And that's why I love math. Math does not remove emotion, which a lot of people expect it to, but we're too emotional. Math helps alleviate it. So sometimes if we're so stressed on what's this fair versus equal going to be, I don't know how to update my will and ESSA, that can be a great place to start to say, hey, sometimes we're blessed with so many opportunities, but math can help narrow our scope as well.
Yeah, just quickly, I guess one of the things that I consider in response to this question is it's vitally important to have clarity on your needs and your wants. So as an example of that, you might have a mixed operation running a couple hundred head cows, and the next generation comes in and says, I'm not so sure I want to have cows in the winter, and they start putting it all on the crop. That outgoing generation might have some issue with that, so better to know that early, so being clear on needs and wants.
Thank you. Okay, one last question here, and then I want to open it up to the audience. Start thinking, jot down some questions if you have, and then we'll get somebody with a microphone around. But while you're thinking, I'm curious to hear from anybody who wants to provide insight on next chapters. So where have you seen farmers move after they've transitioned? Just like provide some inspiration for what it could look like once you're not on the farm.
Yeah, I think when I consider the producers that I've engaged with over the last number of years, there was a few that came to mind for me. I think in some of those more successful situations, it has been where that outgoing generation has clearly stepped away. They've allowed that trust and that transition to happen, because when they continue to be in the weeds and help with some of those day-to-day decisions, that's where you can have some of that friction. So when they do step away, I've seen people get involved in some volunteer work, get involved in different industry boards, so doing some of the board work. They've got deep knowledge and expertise to be able to share in that regard. And then we've also seen some people actually transition into other careers within the agricultural sector. For example, within AFSC and in our claims adjusting team, we have retired farmers that have come over and they've gone into that work. they obviously know their craft very well, and they get to stay busy and be involved with something they really love. So those would just be a couple of examples.
Yeah, I think snowbirding has been a pretty common. That's when all of us cow-calf guys go, oh, nice, yeah, have fun. No, I think that one, but I think absolutely the moving off. What I always think is funny is I feel it's a stereotypical finger point to the dad to say you don't want to move off. But I find equally, dads are sometimes willing to move off, not far away, but move off, but mom's not. Mom wants her garden, mom wants the thing. So I think it's just interesting that we have to be careful not to paint brushes, right? I'll just be blunt, and in my consulting, I very rarely see the full move until it's a health need. But in my consulting, that's one of the first things I want to protect is where do we have access to cash for mom and dad to move to town prematurely? Because we're all living 10 years longer minimum, it's not the classic, I go right to the old folks home. There tends to be about an 8 to 10 year limbo time here. That's a great conversation to have if mom or dad passes away first. That's where sometimes mom will say, I would like to move to town sooner. So do we have that in our business planning? Have we shared that with our finance team? But what I see really works well is they're not willing to move to town, but we put them on an acreage close by, right? So you always tell people to do what you don't do. We have 2 houses on the home quarter. The trees are not tall enough. Dad will make a comment all the time, like, why hasn't that been done yet? And you're like, oh my God, if you couldn't see it, this would be so much easier. So it's definitely that we've seen a lot of success with.
Okay, then let's open it up to the floor. Any questions? Yes.
Can you talk about like when there's a values difference between generations? You know what I mean? Like the difference between attitude towards debt, economic practices, old technology versus new technology, sort of lifestyle. Any advice around how to navigate that?
Values gap, in case anybody didn't hear.
Speaking of technology.
Yeah, for those in the room that maybe didn't hear the question was around, there's a difference in values between the 2 generations that are coming together as it relates to some of the debt and how they're managing the operation and that side of it. Did I paraphrase that correctly? Yeah. So I think that does really come back to the core of our conversation here, and that's where some of that outside help can really be valuable to come in and make sure that everybody is getting their thoughts on the table so it can be considered. And then with that, you can start to work through some of that middle ground as you get there, because there are going to be differences, and frankly, that's okay. I think that's where you can actually have some of that strength. And in some of my opening comments, when I think about farm succession planning, not only do you want to preserve those relationships, but you want to grow them, and you also want to improve the overall financial performance for that business. So if you've got some of those fresh ideas and you're able to collaborate, then you can do that. But I think facilitation would be an important part of that.
This is a little bit of a deviation, but just because we were, again, not family succeeding there, but it didn't get mentioned, so I thought I should mention it, like how we found our successors was I'm on social media, our farm is on social media, and we went looking, we hunted for our successors, and so we were a medium-sized farm. I wanted to try to find someone who had a smaller farm but seemed to share similar values, who was younger than us, who might be interested if I called them up and told them about this opportunity. And so they were strangers to us when we found them. We put it out in a few places like Young Agrarians and such that we are looking to transition off our farm, and we would like to find a family who would see this for the gem that it is, and be interested in taking this business and running with it, because it's doing really well. Our business was at the top of its game when we walked away. It wasn't starting to dwindle at all. So we wanted to see someone who could benefit from that. But yeah, we know a number of who are starting. Hello, I think the battery's dead. We know a number of farmers who are starting to look at their own succession, and they don't have a child who's wanting to take over, and they're not sure how to find someone who would be interested. And so, yeah, I think you might have to be proactive in that, and that's what we were, and it has been a wonderful fit. And this new family is really loving taking on our operation, and they share very similar values, so it's been a good fit.
Just your question, that's where, trying to get down to the root of what is the fear or the obstacle, right? So, is it just, hey, I'm overwhelmed with all the technology and, do we need to invest in it and all those things? But that's where I really nerd out and say, how have we set up our structure, right? So if we have to run by dad everything on the, I want to try, this is where it comes back to math. A banker, you can correct me, sir, but isn't going to tell you what to grow or how to grow it, but they're going to expect one solid business plan, right? And so how do we start to set that mentality in our own families? So an example was my husband and I, we want to grow a cover crop, try it out on our cows, and dad thinks we're nuts, right? We've always grown barley on that and winter wheat, real conversations, right? So instead of him just saying no, that conversation has evolved. That Brett and I put a ton of effort into a really solid business plan, talked to an agronomist on our own, came to him, and he has every right to say no. It's his land, it's his equity, but we're showing up, putting in a lot of effort as if it was a third party, and those conversations are no longer parent to child. It's business partner to business partner. And then I think when I work with junior generations, in extreme cases where there's a lot of control and there is no give and there is none of that, I do come back to them and say, they won't share, there's no transparency, there's all those. There has to be a moment where you take ownership and say, how much am I willing to put all these eggs in a basket? I'm responsible for my family, my future as well. And so it's a balance there for sure.
Any other questions?
This may be a rude question, but given what I've heard today, do you have any examples or experiences of families having family counselors as part of their team?
Oh, absolutely. That's where I'd say the family circle is a huge part. I go to counseling, right? For sure. I go for it in this job because it can be very hard on the heart, right? But also in our own family, we have other members. One family I worked with that was such a unique family, and I'm not saying it's the answer at all. It's a tool, just like life insurance is a tool. It's not the answer, right? But they had a rule that they couldn't sit at a family farm meeting unless they had met with someone to learn how to regulate their own emotions. And those farm meetings were I was like, we are in heaven, what is going on? Everyone is grounded. It's such a completely different vibe, right? So that's where I think the industry has done such great work in bringing that awareness and recognition, and we need to be able to talk to somebody that's not our family and get tools, just like we talk to everyone else, right?
Come from a different.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, I guess I'm going to come from a generation where years ago it was child abuse to give your land to your kids, and that's all changed now because of land values and partially because of different. There's actually some money made in some portions of agriculture. Grain maybe not the best now, but cattle if you're in it is a good business. But what do you do? We're talking about transitions. I'm in a situation, and that's just been working with me. And haven't shared it with her yet, but, you lived all your life on the farm, you've never got it from your father, you wanted to get it from your father, but your father wouldn't sell it to you because farming wasn't good back then, so you left the farm, and a year later he decided he'd sell it to you, and so you bought it. Fair value, like he gave you a great farm. And now you got 2 kids, and they showed no interest in farming all their life. They just wanted a place to live. The one just moved, the other one is close by. Sold them some land a few years ago, and Dad, all I want is an acreage. You farm the land as long as you want. Well, after about a few years, that changed because they started doing some of the farming, and there never was any interest in taking over the farm, so we never ever put in our plans that the kids were going to get it. They were going to get the land, but they weren't going to do what I do. Yeah, there's no money in cattle. Why don't you sell all your cattle and just forget about it all? And all of a sudden now there's a change in the industry. Now there is some dollars in the cattle, so now they're looking at it. So all of a sudden here, we're over 7 years old, and you set up yourself to be independent of everything, and now you've got somebody that wants to come in here and take it over, and it's not the easiest thing. We've done this at a late stage. It's not that you could even think about planning 20 years ago or 15 years ago, because there definitely was no interest. Now all of a sudden now there is interest, and we're running out of time, and they want to hurry this process up. Come on, Dad, let's get going. If we're going to do this, we better do it now.
Yeah, I'll give this one a try. So, first of all, I really want to thank you for sharing your story, because I think what you shared with the audience here today is underscoring the point that this isn't just a one and done exercise. Life happens, people's interests and wants change along the way. So that's why it's really important that you come back, frankly, on an annual basis and you start to have some of these conversations. I don't have a specific answer for you on how to manage that. I'm not a trained financial advisor or farm transition specialist, but yeah, I think it is important that we're looking at this annually and you're bringing in some of that expertise. It's good to hear that you're already working with somebody, so I think you're off in the right direction.
Yeah, I think the rural lifestyle part is a big piece. Like that's just what I call it. But setting up acreages and things like that, and we also joke around and call it the 4-H curse, right? Everybody loves it so much, and maybe there's not a big enough farm for all the siblings to come back, but we can create little rural lifestyles. But to your question there, of course, that's the crux. One of the first questions I always ask is, how did the farm transition to you? Because that's going to tell me a lot. Is we're going to try to mirror what went really well, but sometimes what's human nature is we try to swing the pendulum so far to the opposite side of what didn't go well, right? So just a generic example, it's always interesting when I work with families where the dad passed away young, because that successor had to step up real fast, right? Step in, take over, and learned the power of being allowed to make mistakes, because he was the only one there, and the stress of that and those situations. But sometimes those are the hardest ones to transition roles or responsibilities, and you think, well, that should be an example where it shows it makes sense, right? So there's all those examples. If you're very comfortable and want to continue to make your own decisions and go that way, we can set up. That's why business structure is so powerful to me, and I feel like it's missed. Do we agree that the cows run together in the summer because that just makes sense, but we're going to feed them separately? Okay, do we have 2 tractors? Does this make sense? Mondays and Tuesdays, are we doing 2 yards? Like, that's where we can get very creative. But what it comes back down to again is expectations. Mom and dad's retirement income first and foremost. If junior generation's taking over a lot of the herd to take that on, where's the security for mom and dad's retirement income? And then we move from there. But it's again going back to a transition plan. Doesn't mean you don't get to do the labor or management skills that you wish, but we need to be upfront with junior generation of what is and what is not feasible at this time.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those questions. I'll maybe just be one quick pass around the microphone. If a farmer leaves today and does only one thing in the next 6 months, what should that be from your perspective? And then I'll invite Dean Parkins to come up afterwards and close us out.
I'll start quickly. One thing that I would like to leave with, I think just knowing that farm succession planning is a process, right? And to really have, even though it might be uncomfortable, but to have that conversation with your family about what would they like to see, what are expectations.
Just keep at it.
I think for me, having an up-to-date will is one of the greatest gifts we can leave our family. That's why I always struggle a little bit with this 12% statistic, because I'm not sure what they define as a succession plan, right? So for those of you that have a company, having a really strong unanimous shareholders agreement is a really strong succession plan to start. But please make sure your will is up to date. The divide equally, things like that, those cause us a lot of heartburn and stress, because even if you don't have a successor, there's so many stipulations of co-ownership. There's tax implications, there's legal implications, there's all of these things. So that would be mine, is to please work with your team on updating your will.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point. I guess what I would add to that is that there's one thing you do is go away and think about getting your advisory team set up and established. Some of you are probably thinking, well, that's going to be really expensive. In my experience and looking at many operations, in the grand scheme of things, it really is not. When you think about the tax complications, and if you also think about the relationship cost that could come out of that if you don't have a proper plan in place, it's just not worth it. You're better off to make that investment and to do it right away.
My suggestion would just be to go with confidence, I guess. Farmers are incredible, and you should all be proud that you're farming, and whether, you started a farm, however many years ago, after 1 year of working away and grew it to what it is now, or you've just been owning land for the last 20 years, but not working on the farm. That is to be commended, and you should be proud, and there's a lot that goes into farming and to keeping land, and so just kind of, I think, go with confidence and be proud of yourself.
Yeah, I like all those things. Having a will, definitely, and feeling really proud of yourself and what you're doing. And I guess for me, it's like having your financials in order, understanding your numbers if they're not there already, because that gives a footing to be able to transition it, whether it's in family or out of family, and what that can look like for moving forward. And I think that's a good place to start after getting the will.
Okay, so thanks, Alex, and thanks to the panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. So just a couple of other notes of thanks as well. The advancement team here at Augustana, Debbie, Bree, and Tia, thanks for all your work in putting this together. Thanks also to Scotiabank for all the yummy food, the beverages for this event. And while I'm talking about Scotiabank and those Oilers tickets, maybe I'll have Oleg come up and we'll do the draw right now. So Oleg is with Scotiabank and is an agricultural specialist. And we talked briefly about how Oleg's team is also looking at collaborating on some speaker series on topics like this that you might hear more about in the future. So Oleg, do you want me to hold the jar and then you stick your hand in? Is that a plan? Okay, a drum roll. You trust me? Do we trust you? Yeah, I trust you. Stick your hand in. Mine's the crumbly one. Okay. Oh, so Is it Neil Lunty? Hey, Neil! I'll make you Neil to touch base afterwards and we'll get you those tickets. Congratulations. Also, just a couple of other quick points. There is a form here. If you could fill that out, that would be really helpful as we continue to develop this speaker series. In particular, I'm interested in learning more about ag-related topics that you would like to see in the future. So if you have some thoughts about that, please write them down and we'll work on getting those topics into our speaker series. Then the next series is this event. The next event in this Ag Speaker Series is on March 17th. There's a little form on the desk, so you can see Linda Gorham is from the University of Alberta's Faculty of Agricultural Life and Environmental Sciences in Edmonton. Linda does a number of projects and works with farmers in this region, doing work on the role of humics in crop production. So this is going to be a talk by Linda Gorham on March 17th on soil quality and soil production. So that'll be a really interesting talk, and we'll look forward to having you back for that. Please invite others to join this event. We've got lots of space, as you can see. We can pack even more people into this venue. So that's the end of our event today. So those of you who are registered for the Transition Cafe, you're invited to head back over to the Mayor Hall and the Lobbying Center for lunch. And for all others, we invite you to stay and connect with each other here, finish up the food that you can see in the back, have more coffee, and enjoy your afternoon together. So thanks again for coming. Hope to see you next time as well.